Keep yourself in the loop of everything football on the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. The latest news on and off the field, be it college football, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC to the NFL. We've got you covered. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
Welcome in to the GSMC Football Podcast, right here on the GSMC Podcast Network. It is your host back again, Brice Lewis, to talk about all things football happening in both college and professional. And that's what we're going to do here today on the show. Obviously, you know we do here. Since this is the singular show where I'm only here hosting, I got to give my predictions for all the games in Week 4. So obviously that's what we're going to do. I'm going to give all my Week 4 predictions as we usually have been doing. Also, I'm going to talk about the Thursday night game currently going on right now between the Jets and the Broncos. Also, talk about some NFL news and potentially also some college news in there as well. So we're going to talk about that all today on the GSMC Football Podcast. So appreciate you for tuning in, listening, and letting me be a part of your day once again to talk about all things football. So let's go ahead and dive right into it. And we're going to actually go ahead and dive into the Thursday night football game that's currently going on. Where right now, currently, we just entered the second quarter. And the Jets are up 7-3. And Sam Darnold currently is not on the field just before the first quarter ended. This is some big news in terms of quarterbacking. He was slammed on his shoulder. By a Denver defender, and now he went into the medical tent. So now we don't know what happened to Sam Darnold. Joe Flacco is now in the game for the Jets. So there's a Joe Flacco sighting for you. But yeah, so Sam Darnold is currently injured right now and out with that injury. So that's obviously big news in terms of Sam Darnold, his career, his future. Adam Gase. Obviously, we know the Jets have suffered a lot of injuries so far this year. A lot of their guys have been hurt, but they will be coming back. And it will be a big if they have everybody come back, but then you lose your quarterback. The way he got slammed down kind of reminded me a little bit of the Aaron Rodgers injury from a couple of years ago, where he was basically tossed and slammed to the ground when he was sacked by, I believe it was against the Minnesota Vikings, I believe. And he had suffered a broken collarbone. Honestly, when quarterbacks get thrown in a circular motion with a lot of force, the defender is able to build some power up and slam him. Usually, especially if you land on that shoulder, something's breaking or something's cracking or something's spraining or something's happening. So I would not be surprised if this injury ends up being serious, but we always hope for the best here. Hopefully he will be all right. And obviously on these Thursday games, when I talk about them, I also like to kind of give y'all my views of both teams going into this game as well, to just give you the idea of what both of these teams look like. And obviously this Thursday night game is not a very exciting Thursday night game on the surface of things. You have two 0-3 teams. You have two teams that, you know, their seasons are pretty much over for the most part, unless something miraculous happens. Obviously, I'm going to continue on with the Jets for getting over to Denver. Obviously, the Jets, Adam Gase is on the hot seat. There was a report before the game tonight that said even if the Jets lose to Denver, he will not be fired. But everybody is still expecting Adam Gase to not make it through the season, because I've talked about multiple times here on the podcast how the relationships that he's had with his star players, how many players have called him out publicly, said he's not a good leader, said he's not a good player. I mean, not a good player, but a good coach. All of that. I just think the pressure, the fans wanting him gone, the Jets not playing well, I just feel like there's too many factors in place to keep him around as the head coach of the New York Jets, and I think they need to start looking elsewhere. So I definitely think that's what's happening, because you look at this Jets team, they do have a lot of injuries. But remember, they also lost C.J. Mosley before the season started. They traded Jamal Adams. So they lost two of the best defenders as well. And this Jets team just looks dead in the water right now in the AFC East, and will probably be cemented firmly as the worst team in the AFC East. And, you know, honestly, we know the story about both New York teams. They're not good this year. But the Jets are just not looking good. They're not looking good at all. I mean, right now they're currently leading in this game, but, again, there's 2 0-3 teams. These teams, you would say, are around the same level. I do think Denver may have just a tad bit of talent left, especially with Darnold out, especially if it looks like he's out for the game. I mean, unless Joe Flacco has a vintage performance, I don't see the Jets, unless their defense has a great game, maybe holding in there and trying to win. But it's one of those things that I think that the Jets have to figure out. They have to figure out next year whoever they bring in for Adam Gase, because I do firmly believe Adam Gase will be fired at some point this season. Is Sam Darnold your guy? And then how are we going to build this team around him and make the team more competitive? Because that's going to be big. Obviously, the Jets have not been relevant for a good minute now. And, obviously, you have the second team in New York and the Giants, and people are battling to see, is it the Jets town, is it Giants town? And, both teams aren't doing well right now. And the Jets have, to me, some talent to work with. To me, even through all the years, they've had the talent, especially on the defensive side of the ball. But they've just never been able to get the offensive side of the ball right. They've always struggled at quarterback. They've always struggled with the offensive line. They struggled with weapons, and it's never been the same, And I think that's one of the reasons why they've struggled. But obviously, with Sam Darnold getting hurt tonight, like I said, we hope for the best. We hope it's just a short sprain that he'll be out for a couple weeks and come back. But if it's something major like a collarbone or something like that, or some type of torn shoulder or something, obviously that would not do or be well for the Jets team at all this year. And then if we go to the Broncos coming into this game, starting their third quarterback in 4 games, they went with their third string practice squad player, Brett Rippon. He is a guy who's been on the practice squad for a year. He was starting the practice squad to start the season. Obviously, Drew Lock's hurt currently. He won't be back for a few weeks. Driscoll last week just wasn't working for him. So now they're going ahead and going with Brett Rippon, and here's a live update. We do live updates, even though this broadcast is recorded. This is a live recorded podcast update. The Broncos just scored a touchdown. Jerry Jeudy. Rippon went deep to Jerry Jeudy, and Jerry Jeudy mossed a cornerback. You'll probably see it in the highlights on ESPN. You'll probably see it on Bleacher Report, ESPN, everywhere you go. He mossed the Jets wide receiver. It was a great play, and they scored a touchdown. Now Broncos are up 10-7 on the New York Jets with 13:09 to go left in the second quarter. So there you go, right there is your live update. I guess I could do some highlights for y'all here and there. Can't see it, but I can tell it to you. So, obviously now Broncos are up 10-7, like I said. But back to what I was talking about with the Denver Broncos. The Denver Broncos, they lost Von Miller a couple of days before the season. They just lost Jarrell Casey this week. They have Drew Lock is hurt. Remember they're revamping their secondary. There's a lot of things that Denver was changing, and they were one of the teams that people thought could be a wild card team. And now they're going to probably be at the bottom of the barrel in terms of the NFL, in terms of record, with all the injuries they had. Usually with seasons like this, when you have a season like this, we have the injuries. It's an opportunity for a lot of players who are not usually going to play, if the players that were originally there would play. So it gives them the ability to then prove themselves, maybe show this coaching staff, maybe we need to keep him. Maybe he's a guy we can put in as the new starter. You never know. Teams think about this. Oh, he played well. He's a cheaper alternative. Maybe we can go with him. But Denver's strength this year is going to be their defense, and their biggest hits have came on the defensive side. Obviously, offensively, they lost Drew Lock, and they also lost Cortland Sutton. Obviously, that was a big loss to a torn ACL this year. Obviously, Jerry Jeudy, they expected him to become a great receiver. Now he's going to be the main receiver. And then KJ Hamler is another guy who they probably expected in the slot to potentially be a guy who can make plays. So if anything, this can help you maybe build some excitement for next year if you're a Denver fan. If these young players that are stepping up, play very well this year in the absence. Because then it can make you sit there and think to yourself, well, shoot. If that's the case, when we do get healthy, we'll feel better. Because I expect this to be one of those things where, Denver, you can take this type of season and really just see what you need to do next year. We'll see. of Vic Fangio gets another year, even if the Denver Broncos don't have a good year, because remember, they didn't have a good year last year. So, sometimes, in this league, when you have 2 bad years that are not great, that can put you in position to be fired. So we'll see, even with all the injuries, if it saves him for another year. But, I think Denver's in a position right now where they're just trying to figure it out, just like everybody else. And if I had to give a prediction on this Thursday night game, just out of the 0-3 teams, who's going to get their first win tonight? With Sam Darnold coming out of the game, because he was playing well early in the game, if he doesn't return to this game, I'm going to go ahead and say the Denver Broncos are going to win this game, get the first win of the season. Rippon looks like he's playing pretty decent out there. So, honestly, hey, maybe he can turn some heads, and you never know. But we'll see. I mean, Sam Darnold looks like he's warming up on the sideline right now, so he probably will get back into the game. But even if he gets back into the game, I'm going to stick with my pick. I'm going with Denver, and I think they're going to be able to win the ball game. So there's my pick on the Thursday night game right there. But before we get out of this segment, I want to get into some news coming out from a COVID standpoint, as the Tennessee Titans and Pittsburgh Steelers game that was supposed to be played Sunday was postponed because Tennessee had a couple players who got the COVID-19 virus, and so now that game will be postponed. They were thinking about moving it to Monday night, but then another player from Tennessee tested positive, so they decided to move it. Adam Schefter came out and said that the likely move will be to Week 8. It will probably be a Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday night game, in my opinion, usually in the middle of the week. So we'll have to see, but obviously this is the first real cases in a game having to be affected by COVID so far this season. You remember the Falcons, A.J. Terrell had COVID-19, and luckily nobody on the Falcons got COVID. Nobody on the Bears got COVID, or anybody who played the Falcons previously got COVID. So they were still good to go for their next game. But obviously this is the first time that this has actually affected the scheduling of games. So obviously I'm sure the NFL is going to look and take this more seriously and say, okay, we definitely need to put maybe more protocols in place, which I have news on later in the show. Sorry about that. I'm watching the game right now while doing this podcast. But, yeah, so I have some news on that actually about them adding more measures and everything. So obviously, if you had any people in your fantasy lineup for these two teams, you're gonna have to sit them this week because they're not playing. Obviously, in my situation, I had the Pittsburgh defense this week, and obviously they're not playing, so I have to play a different defense. So hopefully I can figure that out. Right now, I have Cleveland as my second defense. I know they're playing the Cowboys, so I don't feel great about it, but I guess I got to take what I can get because I don't really like anybody else in the waiver wire right now in my league. But anyway, yeah. So if you're in fantasy, it implicates shit. But obviously, they need to make the game up. Adam Schefter said Week 8, so I'm fully expecting the game to be made up in Week 8, and that way they can go ahead and do what they got to do out there. So we'll have to, like I said, we'll have to see what happens. We'll have to see how it goes. Obviously, it sucks, what I'm saying, because so far we've been doing pretty well with the COVID procedures, and then seeing, people on Tennessee get COVID, stopping stuff. We hope we don't see a lot of this season as well. So we'll have to see how it all turns out and how it all goes at the end of the day for both of these teams, and so on and so forth. And we wish everybody who got COVID on the Tennessee Titans a speedy recovery. Well, that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to go ahead and get into my Week 4 predictions. Week 4 predictions, talking about all the games, giving my short analysis on all the games and who I think is going to win these games. So if you want to stay tuned for all that, hearing more on the podcast, keep listening. GSMC. Listen up, sports bettors. This is your man, Brice, here to tell you about my favorite sports book, and that's BetUS. Football, basketball, and baseball are all back, and that means it's time to get down your bets. I only endorse one sports book, and that is BetUS.com. Why, you ask? BetUS is the pioneer in online betting with more than 25 years in the biz. You need a sports book with integrity and longevity, and you need to know that you're going to get paid. You need a sports book that offers everything, including live betting, MMA, golf, horses, esports, entertainment, and all kinds of crazy prop bets and futures. Nobody in the industry gives bigger bonuses than BetUS. Go to betus.com now and fill out your information. It only takes a minute. When you get to the "How did you hear about us" box, type in "My name Brice" or "GSMC Basketball Podcast," and you can get up to 150% in bonuses on your first deposit. Nobody beats that. I bet at BetUS, and so should you. Join BetUS today, and don't forget to type in my name or the show name, GSMC Basketball, to get up to 150% bonus on your first deposit. That's betus.com.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we discussed the Thursday night game currently ongoing between the Denver Broncos and the New York Jets. Currently, at the time of this recording, it is currently in live time, 10-7, Denver leads. I already gave my prediction on the game. I went ahead and said I think Denver's going to go ahead and get the win for the game as well. But if anything else happens throughout the show, I will keep you guys updated. So there you go. We also discussed the COVID-19 tests that were positive for the Tennessee Titans that has now postponed the Tennessee Titans and Pittsburgh Steelers game for Week 4, as they're going to have to move it back. Like I said, Adam Schefter tweeted out saying that it looks like Week 8 will be the time where they move the game back to that point, but we'll see what the final decision is at the end of the day. Obviously, like I said, we're hoping wishing a speedy recovery to everybody on Tennessee who has gotten tested positive, and hopefully there won't be any more spread, or we won't have any more outbreaks on any other team that could potentially cause more postponement of games moving forward. But speaking of games, we're going to now go ahead and get into my Week 4 predictions, give a short analysis, and talk about everybody I think is going to win in their Week 4 matchups. And we're going to go ahead and dive right into it. The first game, the Seattle Seahawks and the Miami Dolphins, 1 o'clock in Miami. Obviously, Seattle is a big favorite in this game, as should be. I mean, Russell Wilson has played like an MVP this year. He is currently the favorite in odds making to win MVP as well. He has played at an unbelievable level. DJ Metcalf has become a legitimate wide receiver and a legitimate deep threat, and Tyler Lockett is one of the best slot receivers in the game. So clearly, Seattle offensively is great. Now, defensively, they are suspect. Defensively, they've let up a lot of points, they've let up a lot of yards. So this defense is susceptible to being scored on and moved on throughout the game. On the Miami side of things, they're coming off the first win of the season against Jacksonville on Thursday night. They have had 10 days to prepare for this game. Ryan Fitzpatrick played better in that game. They're going to have to try to keep a similar formula to what they used against the Jacksonville Jaguars, and they're going to pull out a victory in this game. Ryan Fitzpatrick's got to play efficient, make the right throws, and move the ball methodically, have some type of a running game going. And honestly, it's going to be interesting because the Miami Dolphins could get Byron Jones back for this game, which will be big to get their two top corners back in the same game, going against a team like Seattle to try to combat that passing attack. But overall, I still think Seattle's going to come out with a victory. I think Seattle's just a better team. I think Russell Wilson is going to still have a big game. But I definitely don't think this is going to be a blowout. I know some people think this could be a blowout. I think this might be a closer game than some people suspect. But I still do expect Seattle to come out with a victory in this game and beat the Miami Dolphins and go to 4-0 on the season. So we'll have to see how that goes. with that one. Next, we have Browns and Cowboys. Some people would like to look at the fact of this is probably one of the most interesting games on the slate. And the thing that's intriguing to me is you have a contrast of two styles. Cleveland is one of those teams that wants to be ahead because they have two number one running backs and have shown in the last 2 weeks when they get a lead, they can run the ball. And when they run the ball, they move it because Chubb and Kareem Hunt can make plays on the ground. Dallas is in the position of they get behind in all their games. So they're having to pass to get back. So yeah, it looks like Dak Prescott's putting up great numbers, but remember, they're trailing by 2-3 scores when this happens. So you have a team that wants to get ahead and a team that always gets behind. So this game seems like it could go in the way of the Browns in that situation. But I'm sure the Cowboys know they have to try to get a lead in this game. They know if they get behind, they're playing right into Cleveland's hands. They know that would mean Cleveland would be able to do what they want to do, which is run the football with Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb. And then get play action off of that to Odell Beckham, Jarvis Landry, and those weapons. So this game, listen, the Cowboys are not in a very good division in the NFC East. If they have a chance to create some separation in this division, but they have to win this game. Because if they start 1-3, first you're looking at them and saying, well, dang, they're not having a great season to start off, and then they're not taking advantage of a weak division. And it just makes you wonder, how good is this Dallas team? But if I had to give my prediction in this game, I'm going with the Cleveland Browns. I think Cleveland's going to pick up the victory. I think it's going to be a highly contested game. I think it's going to come out to the last possession as well. I don't think this is any team's going to necessarily blow the other one out. I just think it's going to be a tough contested game. Both teams are going to try to do what they do best on each other, and we'll have to see what happens. Obviously, Dallas has some offensive line issues, so Myles Garrett could have a big game, so you want to watch out for him, but I'll go with Cleveland to win the ball game. And now we're going to go ahead and get to the next game. Cardinals and Panthers. Cardinals coming off a very disappointing loss to the Detroit Lions last week after starting 2-0. Looking like they had so much potential losing that game, but can still bounce back. Kyler Murray had one of his worst games of the year. They're playing a Panther team who got their first win of the year, actually. First game without Christian McCaffrey, got the first win of the year. Teddy Bridgewater did look good last week. This is going to be an interesting game to me. I think both teams, are in a position where they can do some things. And the one thing about Carolina this year that's actually been helping them is their knife and turnover differential. They're 2+ on the season, so they've been able to get turnovers. Kyler Murray did throw 3 picks last week, so they're going to probably try to repeat that performance this week. Both teams, obviously, Panthers are trying to get to 500. Cardinals are trying to get to 3-1. I think Kyler Murray, outside of that game so far, has had a great season to start off. And so we're in a point right now where it's just who do you think is the better team? And I think the Cardinals are. I think the Cardinals are going to win this ball game. I think Kyler Murray is going to bounce back. I think he's going to play a better game than they played last week. This Cardinals team, outside of last week, has honestly played so much better as a team this year than they did last year. Their defense looks so much more improved. Offensive line still needs some work, but better. And obviously, DeAndre Hopkins and Kyler Murray already have flawless chemistry only in the first 3 weeks of the season. So, I think this could be a bit of a high-scoring game, though. I think the Panthers have showed the ability to put some points up. And they're ninth in passing. So, clearly, Teddy Bridgewater is not sitting here throwing it for 202, 20 of 22, and like a touchdown here. He's throwing for some pretty decent yardage and making some plays. So, obviously, they can do something, but I'm going to go with the Panthers to go win the ball game. Then we have Chargers and Buccaneers. Obviously, I like to call this the Brady game because both these teams were who people consider the top 2 teams in the race for Tom Brady this offseason, and obviously he went with Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay obviously has had one of the best defenses all year long. Their defense has showed a lot. They're still getting better too. Offensively, they're getting better week by week, getting the chemistry down. Mike Evans and him. Obviously, Chris Godwin, he's been in and out of the lineup. He's probably not going to play this week, but once he gets healthy and he gets that chemistry down with Tom Brady as well, that's obviously another guy who is considered by some people another number one receiver. And Leonard Fournette is getting more and more comfortable in the offense week by week on the ground. Obviously, the Chargers are coming into it with Justin Herbert going into his second start, or I believe his third start of the season. He's looking to come into this game and try to bounce back. Obviously they won the first game of the season and lost the last two. So, looking to bounce back, play it well. At certain times last week. And honestly, he hasn't played bad at all. Like the Chargers have not played bad at all. Defensively, they're still one of the better defensive teams in the league. They're fourth in points allowed, only giving up 19 a game. But Tampa's right behind them at seventh, only giving up 20 points a game. But the Chargers are 29th in the league, only scoring 17 points a game. So offensively, they have been offensively challenged so far this season, where Tampa Bay is scoring 27 points a game. So in this game, I think that the Buccaneers are going to take this home and win the game. I think Tom Brady is going to continue to look better. I think he's going to continue to have a good day against this Chargers defense. Probably one of the toughest defenses so far outside of the Saints that he has played. So definitely think that this is going to be an interesting game to watch. But I'm going to go with Tampa Bay to pick up the victory here. I think Leonard Fournette. Watch out for Leonard Fournette in this game. I think he might have actually a big game in this game. So definitely think Tampa is going to continue to win, continue to progress as a team while winning. And they're going to be a very dangerous team by the end of the year. Then we're going to get into Colts and Bears. Obviously, the Bears coming to this game a surprising 3-0, some people say, going against the 2-1 Colts. Bears have a chance to go to 4-0. Nick Foles is now the starting quarterback after leading them into a comeback after another collapse by the Atlanta Falcons last week. And, obviously he gets the week as a starter. People think this is over for Mitchell Trubisky. We'll have to see. Colts, after having that disappointing week 1 loss to Jacksonville, has won their last 2 games. Phil Rivers has played very well for them. And the way I look at it, the Colts defense doesn't get a lot of credit. But did you know the Colts are first in points allowed, only giving up 15 points a game this season? The Colts defense is legitimate. They're not slouches. And offensively, they're scoring, averaging 28. Handling Minnesota like they did last week, the Bears are probably going into one of their tougher games of the year so far. But listen, the Bears defense is no slouch either, only 9th in points allowed. So, I think this has the potential to be a defensive game. Obviously, rookie running back Jonathan Taylor this week is going to continue to try to, make waves as now being the full-time starter with Marlon Mack going down with an injury. And this game could go either way on a flip of a coin here. But I'm actually going to go with the Colts this week. I think they're going to go to 3-1 and give Chicago their first loss on the season. I think Philip Rivers is going to make some throws late. And the one thing about Philip Rivers that he hasn't done ever since throwing 2 interceptions in the first game of the season is turn the ball over. He has been much more protective of the ball. And honestly, with the way the Colts are built, run first, play good defense, and Philip Rivers just makes the throws when they're there, that's the formula to win. And I think they're going to be able to execute that formula this week against the Chicago Bears and win the ball game. And then we're going to get into the Jaguars and Bengals. Obviously, another game, 2 teams. Bengals are looking for their first win of the season. Jacksonville's looking to bounce back after a disappointing Thursday night performance. Joe Burrow continues to look good. Obviously got a little banged up in the last game, but he'll be back. Gardner Minshew looking to bounce back from that performance. 2 young quarterbacks in this game. Both teams not really going anywhere this season as far as we know. And, if I had to go ahead and give a quick prediction on this game, I think I'm going to go with the Bengals. I think the Bengals are going to pick up the first win of the season, actually. I think Joe Burrow in this offense has showed some flashes of greatness. Because they have weapons. Like, we forget they have weapons on Cincinnati's offense. And I think that Joe Burrow is getting more and more comfortable week by week and growing week by week. And I think he's going to continue to show that growth this week, and I think they're going to pick up the win over Jacksonville. And to get into our last game before we get out of here and finish it up next segment, we have the Ravens in Washington. Honestly, not that much to say about this game to me because this is what I think is going to happen. Baltimore is coming into this game very angry about what happened on Monday night after getting embarrassed by the Kansas City Chiefs. Washington is a team, had that great week 1 performance against the Eagles, and then you see how good the Eagles are. Now that win doesn't look so impressive, and they've lost 2 straight. Dwayne Haskins has not played that great. Offensively, it's been a challenge for Washington. So, to me, I think Baltimore's going to come into this game, and I think they're going to blow out Washington. I think Lamar Jackson's going to get back on track this week. He's going to, get back to where he expects himself to be. He's going to do it through the arm and on the ground. I think they're going to have a big game on the ground as well, and I think they're just going to run all over the Washington football team this week. So I definitely expect Baltimore to bounce back in this game, and they have a big odds favorite as there are 14 points in the betting odds as well. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to finish out my Week 4 predictions, so stay tuned for that. All that right here and more on the podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA, from the UFC to extreme cage fighting. They got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we were doing the Week 4 predictions. I was going on giving my predictions on the Week 4 games. Obviously, we're going to go ahead and continue on with our Week 4 predictions in this segment. Finish them out. So we're going to go ahead and get right back into it. So, continuing on with my Week 4 predictions. We have the New Orleans Saints and the Detroit Lions. Now, who would have thought coming into this game that both teams would actually have the same record? Now, you must admit, the Saints have obviously played better competition. They've played Green Bay last week and the Raiders, who are a pretty decent team this year. Now, obviously, a lot of people are talking about Drew Brees and is his arm dying? Is he able to throw the ball still? Honestly, the biggest thing, and I've talked to Ethan, he's a Saints fan. He's told me it's not even the offense. It's the defense is letting him down. Because the Saints have been letting up some points on the defensive side of the ball. Now, Detroit coming off the first win of the year. Kenny Golladay came back last week. He looked pretty good in his return. Obviously, Matthew Stafford has his best receiver back. Detroit, one thing about Detroit is I think they can score some points. I'm going to go, when I'm making my prediction, I'm going to go with the Saints to win the game. But Detroit can score some points, so I would not be surprised if you see them score. But I think the Saints will get back on track this week. I think they're going to pick up, the win against Detroit. Obviously, if they didn't, I'm sure the entire state of Louisiana would be in shambles because they're just like, oh, brother, we're losing to Detroit now. Oh, no. And it's just like Tampa Bay is going to run away with the division. Jews washed up. And yada, yada, that's going to happen. But I think, don't worry, New Orleans fans. I think your team's going to bounce back this week against the Detroit Lions and pick up their victory and get back to 500 this week. In our next game, we have Vikings and Texans. Both teams coming against this team. Another game of 2 0-3 teams. Minnesota, obviously, Kirk Cousins has looked terrible. He just hasn't looked that good so far this season. Defensively, they do not look the same. They lost guys up front to get after the passer, and that back end is still very, very suspect. And it's just not looking good. They're struggling. Now, obviously, they're still a good running football team. They're top 10 in rushing, but everything else is abysmal. They're 31st in points allowed. They're 30th in yards allowed. They're 31st in turnover differential. They're 22nd in total yards. I mean, you can clearly see they're 28th in passing yards. So you can see there is a lot of holes on this team. But Houston's not that much better. Deshaun Watson has not played as well as he has in previous years. Obviously, he's gone against probably the hardest schedule to start a season: Kansas City, Baltimore, Pittsburgh. So we can sit here and say they've played some of the highest quality opponents the NFL has to offer. But like I said, in the rankings, they're not any better. They're 28th in scoring, 29th in points allowed, 28th in total yards, 31st in rushing, 28th in turnover differential. It looks like a game in a battle of two bad teams. That's what it looks like. A battle of two bad teams trying to get their first win this season. But if I had to tell you who I'm more confident in, I'm more confident in Deshaun Watson than I am in Kirk Cousins. And I think the Texans are going to play better this week than they've played. Because remember, the Broncos have been beaten by Green Bay, Indianapolis. You know, they've been beat by Green Bay. They've been beaten by Indianapolis. And they were beaten a high-scoring matchup against Tennessee last week. Houston, like I said, has played the top teams the NFL has to offer. And I think they're going to go get their first win this week against Minnesota. I think they're going to get their first victory of the season. I think Deshaun Watson's going to have a good game. And I think it's going to be an average scoring game, like a 20-24 game. But I think that they're going to be able to be the team that picks up the victory when it's said and done. In the next game, we have the 0-3 Giants versus the 2-1 Rams. Probably the second biggest spread of the week. Rams coming off that disappointing loss to the Buffalo Bills. But coming back all the way to almost beat the Bills has to be a bit of a moral victory. They clearly look, like I said, more like the team from the Super Bowl year, not the team from last year. They have three running backs they can hand the ball off to. Jared Goff is playing very well within the offense, and defensively they're making some plays. Aaron Donald's still very dominant up front. Jalen Ramsey's their shutdown guy. Even though people say statistically he hasn't played that great to start this season, he is still a top, very talented player. And the Giants just don't look good this year. They don't look good. They're 31st in scoring, only averaging 12.7 points a game. They have struggled in all elements. They lost Saquon Barkley. They're last in rushing. They're struggling, man. And they look like a team that's going to be one of the worst teams in the NFL this year. And you got a Rams team who's probably a little pissed about losing that game last week, but also motivated. And I think they're going to come out here, handle business, and put the beat down on the Giants. I think they're going to come out here. They're going to have their way running and throwing on the Giants. And I think they're going to pick up a very quality victory this week and get themselves to 3-1 on the season. Obviously, is trying to keep up with Arizona, trying to keep up with Seattle, and a very highly competitive NFC West. Next game, you have the Bills and Raiders. Bills coming off a very impressive victory over the Rams. Josh Allen still looking like a very much improved quarterback this year. The Raiders last week kind of came back to earth. They went against the one team that usually brings your team back to earth, the New England Patriots, and they weren't able to have the same offensive efficiency they were able to have last week, or the week prior when they faced New Orleans. So they're going against now the team who's leading the division in the AFC East, the Buffalo Bills, who still have one of the better defenses in the league, and like I said, passing wise, they're one of the best teams. They're second in passing in the league, and they're third in scoring with 31 a game. But this Bills defense, even though they are a good defense, can be had. Remember, they're letting up 25 points a game, which is in the middle of the pack. So obviously, as you're seeing, defenses haven't played that well this year because that usually would put you at the bottom of the league. But they have let some points up. So I think Las Vegas can score some points and keep this game interesting. This could be a game that could be an upset for the Bills if they don't come into this game and take the Raiders seriously from the get-go. But if they continue to play the way they've had, especially on the offensive end, we all know the Raiders' secondary is very suspect. They struggle to stop people through the air. So to me, if the Bills continue to do what they've been doing, I think they should be able to take care of business in this game and be able to beat the Raiders and go to stay undefeated on the season until their big inevitable matchup against the New England Patriots. So definitely, I think the Bills on the come up once again this season. And then in the next game, very intriguing matchup, you have the Kansas City Chiefs versus the New England Patriots. Now, this is going to be interesting. Now, usually when these teams meet, these games are very wild. These games are very just, you got two of the best coaches. You know, Patriots' strength is their defense. Obviously, Chiefs' strength is their offense. But even though they have usually played outside of last year's game, these games have usually been high scoring. This is the first year that the Chiefs are going to be playing a Patriots team without a Tom Brady. So we'll have to see how Cam Newton does in this role going against Patrick Mahomes. And I think when you look at this game, you think Kansas City has way better weapons. So you think if they're able to score, that the Patriots are going to have a hard time keeping up. So it's going to be really on Bill Belichick this week to make sure that his defense is coached up and ready to go. And they've had success against Patrick Mahomes in games. They've been able to not allow the Chiefs to really run away with it. Remember the first year they played, in the first half of both of those games, in the playoffs and in the regular season, he held the Chiefs to under 10 points. And then last year, the Chiefs only scored, I believe, like 20 points. So they've had some success defensively against Kansas City. So we'll have to see if they can continue that here. But I am going to go with the Chiefs to win the game. I think they're going to continue to stay undefeated. They look so impressive on Monday night against Baltimore. I just think it's hard to not go with Kansas City in this game. And then we're going to get to the Sunday night game between the Eagles and 49ers. Now this game, again, not the greatest primetime game in the world. Eagles coming into this game struggling. The sky is falling. Wentz is looking terrible. Offensive line isn't good. Defensively, they're selling out. There's just not a lot of good things happening right now. Wentz obviously has to play better if they're going to have a chance in this game. Obviously, the 49ers are still dealing with their injuries, but looked good last week. Even though it was against the Giants, did look good with all the injuries. They still know who they are as a football team. They're a run-first team with play action with Nick Mullins now. And the Chiefs, I think the 49ers are going to stick to what they do. They know what they do best. They know what their strength is. And I think they're going to stick to what they know, what they can do. And I think they're going to continue to ground it out, pound it out against them. Because they're a very balanced team on the offensive end. And defensively, luckily for the 49ers, they have a lot of defensive talent. So yes, they did lose two of their star defensive linemen, but they still have defensive talent across the board. And against an Eagles team that's struggling offensively as much as they are, I think this should be a game they should be still pretty much able to handle and win. So if I was a betting man, I would definitely put my money on the 49ers in this game. But like I said, with the injuries, if the Philadelphia Eagles can maybe find something that works and Wentz plays better, you don't know, potential upset could happen here. But right now, I feel more confident in Kyle Shanahan and his staff and the team, and I'm going with San Francisco to win their game and continue on. And then we're going to get to the Monday night game that brings some solace to my soul. We have the Atlanta Falcons traveling to Lambeau Field to play the Green Bay Packers. And I said this game can either go three ways. Either the Falcons get smacked, either this game is going to be competitive, or the Falcons are going to choke a lead. You notice how I gave two negative options for the Falcons. I mean, shoot, they could lose all three of those scenarios, but I hope it's competitive. Obviously, as a Falcon fans, I hope we can somehow pull out a win, but at the same time, everything happening with Dan Quinn and the team, it's just kind of like, you know what? Honestly, I told this to Ethan. I really sometimes just think, you know what? If Green Bay smacks us, it's okay. Because It really is getting to a point with Dan Quinn where it's just like anything to get him out the door. But obviously, that's my team. Obviously, I have guys on this team, on my fantasy team, so I need them to put up some numbers. Hey, that's one thing about the Falcons, though. Remember, the Falcons still have one of the best offenses in the NFL. So they're going to be put up some points, I think, in this game on the Packers. I just think when it all comes to shove, I think the Packers are still going to end up winning this game. So I think Green Bay is going to win the game and beat the Falcons. But like I said, there's 3 ways that's going to happen. So it can happen. So we'll have to see which one the Falcons pick this week. But those are my week 4 predictions on all of the games. Hopefully I get a pretty good win-to-loss ratio this week. So there you go. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we have some news around the entire world of football. So stay tuned right here on the GSMC Football Podcast.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, I wrapped up my Week 4 predictions for the week, giving all my predictions on all Week 4 games. So obviously, if you want to go back, listen, if you missed that, somehow maybe you were busy listening to it, so you weren't really paying attention fully, maybe you didn't hear your favorite team's prediction, what I thought about that game that week, go ahead, rewind, listen to it. It's still there, will always be there in the arts of GSMC. But now we're going to get into some just general topics and news here on the podcast, but I want to start with something I just want to talk about personally. So far through 3 weeks in the season going into week 4, which teams could potentially be looking to move on from their starting quarterback? Teams that quarterbacks are not playing well right now that may see potentially them looking into maybe going in a different direction. So that's going to be, I think this is going to be a good discussion. I think this is something I want to talk about and see, what some people think about some of the quarterbacks I say when we talk about it. And the first guy I want to get into is Sam Darnold, actually, because they're playing right now. If you want to update on the game, currently at 34 seconds left in the second half, Denver's up 17-10. Just saying, went ahead with pick Denver for the game, just in case y'all forgot. So there you go. But yeah, so Sam Darnold is in an interesting situation because he's in his 3rd year, obviously going into the 4th year. Most rookies have a 5th year option. You would think the Jets would pick up that 5th year option, right? Well, it probably depends on how the rest of the year goes for Darnold. If Darnold continues to struggle and he continues to turn the ball over and makes mistakes, that might not be such a foregone conclusion. Because obviously that's a very telling, sign if the team doesn't pick up the 5th year option. So Sam doesn't have a lot of pressure or unbelievable amounts of pressure. But there is some pressure on him to play well, even with the team that he has. Because after a while, you never know, especially with Adam Gase potentially probably being out the door, that next staff might only give Darnold a 1-year audition. So he kind of has to show that he can play this year. He showed signs in the previous years, but if he can continue to maybe play better, play well down the stretch, obviously with them getting healthy will help. He could put himself in a good place with the new staff coming in probably next year, and potentially maybe there won't be a chance they move on from Sam Darnold. But we don't know yet. I'm just saying that because you just don't know with the team struggling, how much of it are they going to put on Darnold? So would that potentially maybe make them consider moving on? So that's one quarterback I think may move, but probably is more of the unlikely side of things. But just a thought, just a tit for tat. Another quarterback who I think may not be in their position next year, Dwayne Haskins. He just looks like the game is just too much for him. It's too fast for him. It's like he's not going to sit here and light you up. He's kind of like Tyrod Taylor in terms of his numbers. He don't put up a lot of passing yards. He don't score a lot of he could give you about maybe 1 or 2 touchdowns a game. The only difference between him and Tyrod is that Dwayne Haskins can turn the ball over and will turn the ball over. He just, in the first week, he played decent. He played well enough to win that game. But the last 2 weeks, he's kind of struggled a bit. And so people are even saying that they think Alex Smith might even end up starting at some point this year. Since obviously, Alex Smith has made his miraculous recovery from his broken leg from a couple years ago. And so Ron Rivera, remember, he's the new head coach. He didn't draft Dwayne Haskins. If he ends up having to bench Dwayne Haskins, they might have a new quarterback next year. I mean, listen, we don't know how good Alex Smith is going to look coming back. You never know. It could be one of those situations where Alex Smith comes back, plays well, he's the guy next year. But if Dwayne Haskins doesn't show more progression, doesn't show more improvement, there's definitely a possibility that he will not be the Washington football team's quarterback next year when it all comes together. So that's going to be something to keep an eye out on. And I kind of want to know from Washington fans, do you even want Dwayne Haskins as your quarterback? Because sometimes you hear a lot of vocal fan bases talk about it. Obviously I'm not in Washington football team circles, but I haven't really heard a lot about that. It makes me wonder, how are fans feeling about him? I mean, remember, some people were ready to bail on Dwayne Haskins after the first year. So you might still have those people feeling like, hey, if he don't play better, move off of him next year. So that's another guy who potentially could be on the move. Another guy who could potentially be on the move, I think, next year at the quarterback position. And that depends, honestly, again, on the team's success. Obviously, this has been a guy that has been talked about a lot, Baker Mayfield. Because, again, he has a new staff this year. So far, they're 2-1. But this, what depends if he's going to be there to me next year or not, is depends on how the Browns season goes. If Browns continue to play the way they're playing now, I think that Baker will be safe, and I think he'll be the guy next year. But if the Browns start to lose games, and let's say it's because they start to get behind and Baker's having to throw and he starts turning the ball over again and taking sacks, that's going to obviously raise some questions of whether Cleveland will keep him for a second year. Because if Cleveland comes to that realization, hey, we got talent everywhere else, quarterback's the problem, you don't think they're going to try to move off of Baker? So this could really be a tale of two seasons for Baker. If the Browns continue to play this way, play well, get a key win against Dallas this Sunday, and continue to be like this all season long, Baker should be fine. He should be the guy next year. But if they start to lose and he starts to be at the center of those problems, that question does have to be asked if Baker Mayfield will be under center for Cleveland in 2021. And then another guy who potentially could be on that list for me, Drew Lock. Obviously, there was a lot of hype behind Drew Lock coming into the season based off of how he played last season. And some may say you haven't had enough big of a sample size to make this, but The reason why I say this is obviously with Denver having the type of season they're having. Drew Lock's currently hurt right now. But still, he's going to come back at some point this season. Depending on how he plays coming back, John Elway has kind of showed he's not afraid to make a move if he feels like he can get a better guy out there quickly. He's been on a quarterback for a year and moved off of him. So, again, this is going to depend on if Drew Lock continues his progression when he comes back from his injury. If Drew Lock comes back from his injury, lights it up, Denver plays very well, then clearly he's going to be the guy next year. But what if he comes back and he gets hurt again? What if he comes back and he doesn't play well? Those questions will start to arise a little bit of, hey, is he really the guy to lead this franchise? Does John Elway have to look for another quarterback again? I'm sure John Elway is hoping this works out because I'm sure he knows he cannot afford another setback at the quarterback position. Because outside of getting Peyton Manning, he has basically struck out all the quarterbacks that he's had up to this point. So I'm sure he's looking at this and saying, oh, I hope this works out. Listen, I hope it works out for Drew Lock too. I like him. So we'll have to see when he returns from that injury how he's going to look going into the rest of the season. Now, I'm sure there's other quarterbacks you can probably put on this list. Those are just a few guys that I want to bring up and talk about, potentially maybe being on the list of guys who may not be on the team under center next year, potentially. So we'll have to see. We'll have to see how it all works out. Now, we have some general news around the NFL I want to get to before we get out of here. Marlon Humphrey was just given, the Baltimore All-Pro corner, was just given a 5-year, $98 million extension. He has 2 years left remaining on his current deal and now will be with Baltimore for the next 7 years. Huge money for Marlon Humphrey. Obviously, the Baltimore values him as a shutdown corner. If y'all know Marlon Humphrey, he came out of Alabama. He's played very well for Baltimore. I mean, it feels like every other day and every other week, man, you're seeing a defensive player getting huge money, defensive lineman getting $100 million. I don't know if we haven't actually, it's kind of funny. People would consider linebackers the heart of a defense. I don't know if we've had a linebacker who's hit $100 million yet. I think we've had linebackers hit 75. I don't think we've had a $100 million linebacker yet. I could be wrong. But I don't think we've had a $100 million linebacker, but I expect that to come. And now you got a corner who basically is making over $100 million if you think about the entire totality of his 7-year contract left. But 98 in the 5 years. Big money, big money. Showing that type of investment to a guy like that. Baltimore is known for taking care of their players. And they're doing it. They're taking care of them. So obviously, that's big to go lock up a shutdown corner for years to come for Baltimore. And then our last news. The Texans, after visiting with safety Earl Thomas, has decided not to sign Earl Thomas. And so Earl Thomas will continue to be a free agent during this season. I expect him to get more visits throughout the year just because, listen, injuries obviously have happened in the league so far. And so so if you have some injuries to the back end of your defense, especially at safety, you would think Earl Thomas would be at the top of a lot of people's list in terms of safeties to call in. Obviously, the Texans must have felt like they're just better off sticking with who they have on their team. We don't know the details. We don't know if Earl Thomas was potentially asking for a lot of money, and maybe that's why, especially with Bill O'Brien being the general manager as well as the head coach, that played a factor. But they personally feel like, hey, we'll live without Earl Thomas. But I still expect Earl Thomas to get people to look at him because he still can play. He has some talent. And he could be a valuable part of any defense who may need that safety to replace a guy who may have gotten hurt, or you maybe feel like you want more of a ball hawking safety because that's what Earl Thomas was known for, his ball hawking ability. So we'll have to see what happens on that end with Earl Thomas and if he's able to land a job at some point this season in the NFL, which a part of me does feel like he still will be able to, and it'll be interesting to see if he actually can. But guys, so that is it right here on the GSMC Football Podcast. Thank you for tuning in once again. Thank you for listening. Appreciate you letting me be part of your day. Also, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at GSMC_football so we can talk about all things football on there. Very, very active Twitter feed. Very interesting tweets we make on there, talking about everything that happens in the football world. Also, don't forget, no matter what platform you're listening to us on, you leave us a review or subscribe. We really appreciate it. Also, don't forget to listen to other amazing podcasts here on the GSMC Podcast Network. This is your host, Brice, signing out, saying have a good day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.